A Marine sat quietly at his son's graduation until security told him to leave. What happened next stunned the entire crowd. You ever wait years for a single day? Not a vacation, not a promotion, but a moment. One moment. Just long enough to see your child, your flesh and blood, walk across a stage and grab a piece of paper that says, "You made it." That was all retired Marine Staff Sergeant Darnell Hughes wanted. Nothing more. No speech, no spotlight. Just a folding chair, a clear view of the stage, and the sight of his son, Caleb, receiving that high school diploma in San Bernardino, California. The morning of the graduation, Darnell was up before the sun. Old habits die hard. He laid everything out on the bed like he used to back in the barracks. White gloves, cummerbund, medals, shoes so polished they could reflect your soul back to you. And of course, the Marine Corps dress blues. He hadn't worn them in nearly 5 years. Not since his retirement ceremony. But today was special. He looked at himself in the mirror. The uniform still fit like it was stitched yesterday. His chest didn't puff out from ego. It came from 20 years of service, 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan, and 1 promise to a teenage son who needed a father more than a warrior. "Damn, I clean up all right," he muttered with a small smirk, brushing invisible dust off his left shoulder. His hands paused for a second when they reached the medals. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy Commendation. Each one pinned with pain and blood. Not for show, not for applause, but as a reminder of who didn't make it back. From the kitchen came the scent of burnt toast and overcooked eggs. Caleb was messing up breakfast again. That boy could build a robot from scrap, but couldn't fry an egg if his life depended on it. "Dad, you almost ready?" Caleb called from down the hall. "Ready as I'll ever be," Darnell replied, adjusting his collar. He stepped into the living room, boots clicking against the hardwood, and Caleb froze. The 17-year-old wore his black cap and gown, nervously tugging at the sleeves. But the moment he saw his father in full-dress blues, his expression changed. "Whoa," Caleb whispered. "You look serious." Darnell chuckled. "It's a serious day." They stared at each other for a beat longer. No words, just a shared weight neither one could explain. Caleb finally cracked a grin. "You're gonna make everyone else look like bums." "That's not the goal," Darnell said. "Just want to show up as who I am." They got in the truck and made their way to Roosevelt High, where the graduation was being held on the football field. Families were already pouring in, lawn chairs, strollers, umbrellas. It looked like a neighborhood block party. Some parents wore t-shirts with their kids' face printed on the front. Others came in jeans and flip-flops. One guy had a neon green mohawk and a tank top that said, "Game over." But Darnell? He stood out. Not because he was trying to, but because honor doesn't blend in. It walks tall, whether you notice or not. He found his seat early, about 6 rows from the back. Far enough not to make a scene, close enough to see the stage. He sat alone. Not because he didn't have people who cared, but because he didn't need a crowd. His presence was the company. He glanced around. A few heads turned. Some folks smiled politely. Others stared longer than necessary. A woman in front of him nudged her husband and whispered something in his ear. The husband turned, looked Darnell up and down, and gave a half smile before turning back around. It was always like that. Always the look, not the uniform, the man inside it. But Darnell kept his eyes forward. Caleb would be sitting with his classmates on the far left of the field. The boy was smart, top 10 in his class. Mechanical engineering bound. Darnell felt the heat rise in his chest. Not anger, just pride trying to break through the seams of his coat. But before the ceremony even began, 2 men with clipboards and earpieces started making their way down the aisle, and they weren't looking for a seat. Darnell noticed them coming before they said a word. 2 men, mid-30s, khakis, tucked-in polo shirts with a small Roosevelt Event Security logo stitched on the chest. One of them had a clipboard tucked under his arm. The other had sunglasses he didn't bother removing, even in the shade of the bleachers. They weren't walking like ushers helping a guest. They were walking with intent, heads forward, steps sharp, and their eyes locked straight on him. Darnell's posture didn't change. He didn't stand. He didn't look away. He simply turned his head slightly, acknowledging them with the calm of a man who's been approached before, and almost always for the same reason. "Excuse me, sir," said the one with the clipboard. His badge read G. Langston. Do you mind stepping aside with us for a quick word? Darnell raised an eyebrow. About what? Langston offered a tight smile. We've had a couple of concerns from guests. Some people feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Darnell repeated slowly, like he didn't quite hear it right. The second guard spoke up. His voice was a bit lower, with that condescending calm that people use when they're trying to act like they're doing you a favor. It's just a formal event. We're asking all attendees to blend in and keep things low-key. Darnell looked down at himself, then back up at them. This is my formal. Langston cleared his throat. Yes, sir, but the medals, the uniform, it's, drawing some attention. We just want to make sure the focus stays on the graduates. Darnell gave a small chuckle under his breath, shaking his head slightly. Right, because nothing says distraction like a Marine sitting in the back row minding his business. The crowd around them had gone quiet, not fully silent, but quiet enough. Conversations dimmed. A few heads subtly turned. Darnell could feel the shift. It was the same shift he'd felt walking through airports, grocery stores, even church sometimes. The quiet recalculation of who people assumed he was. Langston took a small step closer, lowering his voice. Sir, if you could just step outside the gate, we can have this conversation in private. No, Darnell said, firm but controlled. I'm not leaving. Sir, we're trying to keep this smooth. And I'm trying to watch my son graduate. The second guard shifted his weight. You could tell he didn't expect resistance. They rarely did. Look, no one's accusing you of anything, he added. We're just trying to avoid a disruption. Darnell leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. Let me explain something. I served 20 years in the Marines. I've buried men. I've been shot at, blown up, patched up. I've stood on airstrips waiting for flag-draped coffins. And through all that, I never once asked anyone to make space for me. I earned it. Langston hesitated. The other guard looked at him like, now what? In the row behind Darnell, a woman whispered, He's just watching the ceremony. Leave him alone. Someone else muttered, Is this really necessary? But the guards kept standing, and Darnell stayed seated. A strange standoff, quiet but sharp, like a rubber band stretched too far. A moment passed, then another. I'm not going anywhere, Darnell said, looking right at them. But the two guards weren't finished, and Darnell was about to learn that sometimes the weight of your service doesn't stop people from trying to shrink you down. Langston didn't move, neither did the other guy. It was clear they weren't used to being told no. Most people just complied, even when they didn't have to. That's how these things usually went. Quiet pressure, polite words masking firm demands, and if that didn't work, authority. But Darnell wasn't most people. The man had stared down roadblocks in Kandahar and insurgents in Fallujah. Two rent-a-cop guards with clipboards and half-stitched badges weren't going to make him flinch. But he didn't raise his voice, didn't puff his chest. That wasn't how he was wired. Calm. Always calm. Even when the situation wasn't. Langston pulled out a small walkie-talkie and stepped aside. We might need the supervisor out here, he muttered into it, turning his back. Darnell looked forward, ignoring them now. His focus returned to the stage, even though it hadn't started. The band was still setting up. A few students in robes were fixing their caps and giggling off to the side. He could see Caleb in the second row, straight back, hands folded. Always had that discipline in him. Sir, the other guard said again, now more tense. We're asking respectfully. Don't make this more complicated. Darnell looked at him, slow and deliberate. Respectfully would have been offering me a bottle of water and thanking me for showing up. But here we are. More heads had turned now. Some folks were watching openly. Others were pretending not to. A dad in a Dodgers cap 2 rows ahead tilted his head, just enough to listen. And then, Excuse me. The voice came from behind Darnell, firm, clear, and immediately different. The guards turned. A man was standing at the top of the bleachers. He wore a charcoal gray button-up, sleeves rolled, and jeans, clean-shaven, squared jaw, no uniform. But something about him said, Pay attention. Is there a problem here? He asked, stepping down slowly. Langston frowned. Sir, we're handling a situation. Please stay seated. The man ignored that. His steps were careful, but not hesitant. As he got closer, you could see the ink running down his forearm, military-style tattoos, faded with time. A few people near the aisle moved to make space, like they knew. He reached Darnell's row and stopped. "Darnell?" he asked. Darnell looked over and broke into a slow, surprised smile. "Eli Mendoza," he said. "I'll be damned." Eli gave him a quick nod and turned back to the guards. "This man served with me. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Ramadi, '07. Langston blinked. "Okay, well, this doesn't really concern—" "It does now," Eli interrupted. Langston glanced at the other guard, uncertain. "Sir, we're under instruction to avoid uniformed guests drawing—" "You think he put that uniform on for you?" Eli asked, his voice colder now. "He didn't walk in here to be seen. He walked in because his son's graduating, same as everyone else." Another man stood, this time from 3 rows down. Big guy, stocky build, wore a black shirt, beard trimmed sharp. "You said Ramadi?" he asked Eli. "What year?" Eli didn't even turn. '07, then Fallujah." The man nodded. "We ran recon outside Fallujah. SEAL Team 4. And just like that, another stood, then another, one in a tan jacket, one in a baseball cap, one who looked like he hadn't shaved in a week, all spread throughout the stands. 6 men, quiet, present, watching. Eli didn't say a word, neither did they. They didn't have to. Langston's mouth opened, then closed. His partner looked pale now. He stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware that this wasn't the scene he thought he was managing. "These men," Eli said, looking the guards dead in the eye, "didn't come here for a fight. They came here to support a brother. That's it. You came here with assumptions, and now you're outnumbered in ways you don't even understand." Nobody clapped, nobody shouted, but the air changed. You could feel it. Eli turned back to Darnell. "We good?" Darnell nodded, his voice low. "We're good." The guards still hadn't moved, frozen in place like they were waiting for some miracle of clarity to land in their laps. But then a woman from the crowd stood up. She wore a floral blouse and glasses and had been quietly watching from the 4th row. She raised her voice, just enough. Let him watch his son graduate. A few people murmured in agreement. Then more, like a wave, soft but undeniable. The guards looked around, and finally, Langston took a step back. "Okay," he said stiffly. "We'll notify admin. Enjoy the ceremony." They walked off, not in defeat, but with the realization they were never in control to begin with. But not everyone was ready to let it slide, and now the school principal was walking down from the stage with a tight face and a decision to make. Darnell adjusted his gloves, slow, precise, almost ceremonial. His heartbeat had picked up, but his face didn't show it. One of the first things they taught him in basic was how to hold your ground without raising your voice. Let other people flinch first. Eli had taken a seat 1 row behind him now. The other SEALs returned to their spots, scattered across the bleachers like quiet watchmen. The tension had thinned, but it didn't disappear. People were still whispering, heads still tilted. You could feel the room holding its breath for whatever was coming next. Then came the sound of heels on metal steps. Dr. Meredith Fulton, principal of Roosevelt High, walked down toward the middle section, her black slacks pressed, her arms swinging slightly with purpose. She looked like she hadn't yet decided how this was going to play out, and she was hoping the problem would resolve itself before she reached it. Darnell watched her approach. He didn't move. Neither did Eli. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, polite but brisk. "Can I speak with you both for just a moment?" Eli opened his mouth, but Darnell raised a hand gently and stood up. He turned to face her directly, his back straight, his eyes level. "I'm listening," he said. Dr. Fulton glanced at the remaining security staff standing awkwardly off to the side, then turned her attention fully to Darnell. "We've had a couple of concerns," she began. "Some guests felt that the uniform may have been, well, a bit much for the event, that it might distract from the ceremony. Now, I want to make sure everyone is comfortable and—" "Let me stop you right there," Darnell said. His tone wasn't rude, but it cut through her sentence like a clean blade. "I served 20 years. I wore this uniform to funerals, to retirements, to promotions, and today I wear it to watch my son become a man. I didn't bring a flag. I didn't bring a banner. I didn't stand on a chair. I came here early, found my seat, and sat down." Dr. Fulton blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, like she had a rebuttal, but she said nothing. Eli stood too now. I've worn that same uniform. So have 5 others in this crowd. None of us asked for attention. We came to honor a man who deserves to sit here like any other father." A brief silence stretched between them. Darnell looked her dead in the eye. "Let me ask you something, ma'am. If I showed up in a tracksuit or a hoodie, would we be having this conversation?" Dr. Fulton's expression flickered. "I honestly don't know." "That's the problem," Darnell said quietly. Behind them, someone clapped once, just a single clap. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. A couple more followed, then another, then silence again. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't a protest. It was just acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't need to be explained. Dr. Fulton looked around the stands, then back at Darnell. "I am sorry this happened," she said softly. "No one should have made you feel unwelcome." Darnell nodded. "Apology accepted, but let's be clear, I was never leaving." She gave a small nod, turned, and walked back up the steps. She didn't look back. Darnell exhaled slowly and sat down again. Eli leaned forward slightly from the row behind. "You handled that better than I would have," he muttered. Darnell allowed himself a small smile. "Didn't come here to fight." "Funny," Eli replied. "Neither did we." They both looked toward the stage. A man at the podium tapped the mic twice, clearing his throat. The band had stopped tuning. Students were lining up backstage. The ceremony was about to start. Eli leaned back. "Think he's nervous?" Darnell grinned. "Caleb? That kid's built for pressure. He used to solve puzzles upside down just to make it harder on himself." "Like father, like son." Darnell didn't say anything. His eyes were locked on the stage now. But before his son could take that walk, there was still one more test of respect. This time from the system itself. And not everyone in the crowd agreed with how things had been handled. As the sun climbed higher over the Roosevelt High football field, the ceremony finally began. Folding chairs creaked, programs rustled. The smell of sunscreen mixed with fresh-cut grass. On stage, the school board members lined up behind the podium, smiling too wide and shaking each other's hands like they were at a press conference. But Darnell wasn't paying attention to them. His eyes stayed on the student rows, scanning until he found Caleb, second seat in the 3rd row, gold sash over his shoulders, sitting tall. That's what this was all for. A few rows ahead, one of the SEALs, Wes Kinney, a bald man with hands like cinder blocks, was quietly adjusting his watch. He hadn't said a word since the confrontation, but he kept glancing back every so often, like he was still on watch. Old habits. Another SEAL, Desmond Rivas, leaned over to whisper to the woman next to him, his wife, maybe. You could tell he was trying to keep the mood light, cracking a joke, probably about the heat. But every few minutes, his gaze drifted back to Darnell. They weren't there for drama. They weren't there to be noticed. They were there because of Ramadi, because of shared foxholes, because they had watched Darnell carry bleeding men on his shoulders when no one else could. When you serve with someone like that, you don't forget. But not everyone understood what it meant. Halfway through the student roll call, a man stood up near the far right bleachers, white polo, phone in hand. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ceremony like a knife. "This isn't a military event," he barked. "Can we get back to the students?" Murmurs broke out. Some turned to look. Others tried to pretend they hadn't heard. Darnell didn't flinch. He didn't even look over. But Eli did. He stood again, not rushed, not dramatic, just rising, slowly, deliberately. The man in the polo looked startled. He hadn't expected anyone to challenge him, but before he could say another word, Wes Kinney stood too, then Rivas, then the 3 others, Chaz Holbrook, Leo Tron, and Omar Staten. No one said a word. 6 men, all in different rows, spread out across the stands, standing tall, eyes forward. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a threat. It was presence. And it was louder than shouting. The man in the polo sat back down without being asked. That was the thing about respect. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up and makes people reconsider their words. Someone from the faculty stage whispered to the announcer. A pause. Then the roll call continued like nothing happened. Darnell's gaze never left Caleb, but he felt the silence around him. And it wasn't uncomfortable. It was strong, protective. He turned his head slightly and caught Eli's eye, gave him a slow nod. Eli nodded back. Nothing else needed to be said. In the row behind Darnell, a teenage boy leaned over to his mother. "Who are they?" he asked, staring at the men still standing. "They're his brothers," she whispered. "Just not by blood." The ceremony rolled on. The sun bore down harder, but the weight that had filled the air earlier, the judgment, the pushback, it had faded. Because when people witness real respect, the fake kind doesn't hold up. And in that moment, Darnell Hughes, former Marine, father, son of a welder from Louisiana, sat exactly where he belonged, surrounded not just by classmates and parents, but by men who would cross a country just to stand behind him for one afternoon. But as the final names neared and the crowd leaned in for pictures and applause, one more person had something to say, and she wouldn't keep quiet. Just as the announcer was beginning the last column of graduates, a woman near the front stood up, not clumsily, deliberately. She held a program in one hand, a pair of sunglasses in the other. Her white blouse had a pearl clasp at the collar, and her mouth was already half open before she cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she called out, lifting her voice over the microphone. "Before the ceremony continues, I think this situation needs to be addressed." The murmur returned, stronger this time. You could feel the crowd stiffen, unsure whether this was going to be a complaint, a protest, or some speech they didn't ask for. Darnell didn't move. His eyes narrowed, but he stayed still. Dr. Fulton, sitting on stage behind the announcer, stood and moved toward the microphone before the woman could go on. She recognized her, Mrs. Taryn Whitlow, member of the school board, longtime parent volunteer, and someone known to have opinions no one asked for. "Mrs. Whitlow, please," Fulton said gently. "We're just about to conclude the ceremony." But Taryn didn't back down. "I'm just saying what others are thinking," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "This was supposed to be about the students, and yet the focus has completely shifted. This isn't Arlington Cemetery, it's a high school football field." A wave of discomfort rolled across the stands. Some people looked away. A few clutched their purses or tightened their arms around their kids. One guy near the snack tent shook his head. Eli Mendoza started to rise again, but Darnell reached back with one gloved hand, palm open, without turning around. He was calm. Dr. Fulton stepped fully in front of the mic now. "I think we've all had enough division for one morning," she said evenly. "The focus hasn't shifted. It's been exactly where it should be, on the people who raised these students, guided them, and showed up to celebrate them." A pause. "And Mr. Hughes," she added, "has done nothing but sit quietly and honor his son. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, then maybe they should ask themselves why." Taryn looked stunned, not angry, just unprepared for someone to meet her tone with grace and firmness. A few people clapped. It started small, then grew. Fulton didn't wait for applause. She just turned back to the mic and gave a slight nod to the announcer. "Let's continue," she said. Darnell exhaled. He hadn't realized how long he'd been holding his breath. Eli leaned in close behind him. "That lady gonna file a complaint or throw a fit, you think?" Darnell gave the smallest smile. "Let her, it's not her day." And it wasn't. A couple rows over, a woman turned to her teenage son and whispered, "That's why we show up. That's why we stay. Because staying matters. Showing up matters, especially when someone tries to push you out." But the real moment Darnell had been waiting for, the one he came dressed in honor for, was only seconds away now. Caleb Hughes. The name rang out over the loudspeakers like a bell struck clean. For a split second, everything froze for Darnell. All the side conversations, the judgment, the tension, gone. All he saw was his son, standing at the edge of the stage, shoulders back, chin high, robe flowing with each step. Caleb didn't look nervous. He looked sure, like he had already carried the weight of the moment and made peace with it. Darnell stood, not to draw attention, not to make a statement. He stood because some moments require your full height. From the stage, Caleb saw him, their eyes locked. And right there, mid-walk, Caleb gave him a look. Not big, not theatrical, just a small nod. Subtle, strong, a thank you that didn't need words. He took the diploma, shook hands with the principal, then turned toward the crowd. The place clapped, cheered, whistled, not just for Caleb, but for what that moment stood for. Respect, quiet resilience, and a father who refused to disappear. Darnell didn't smile wide. He didn't cry. He just placed a hand over his chest, over the medals he hadn't worn in years, and gave his son that same subtle nod back. The kind only men who've lived through things understand. Eli clapped once, then twice. The seals followed. Soon the rest of the audience joined in. The clapping didn't roar, but it lasted. It lingered. It said everything no speech could. Caleb exited the stage and returned to his seat, giving Darnell one final glance as he passed by the bleachers. Darnell sat down slowly, not because he was tired, but because the moment had landed. Heavy, worth every breath he'd held. He looked around. Nobody was whispering anymore. Nobody was uncomfortable. The only thing that filled the air now was respect. And it wasn't loud. It was steady. It was earned. But what people talked about later wasn't the medals, the confrontation, or even the principal's words. It was how one man never stood alone, and how a son walked taller because his father never sat down when it mattered. Some moments don't need a microphone. They don't need a headline or a spotlight. They just need someone to stand their ground, with quiet strength, with dignity, and with truth. Darnell Hughes didn't come to be seen. He came to see his son. But in doing so, he reminded everyone watching what respect actually looks like and how easily it can be denied or restored. This wasn't about a uniform. This was about presence, about showing up, especially when the world says you don't belong, and about having people, real people, who will stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, even when you didn't ask. Let this be a reminder. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay seated. Other times, it's standing for someone else. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, and when the time comes, don't stay silent. Be the one who stands.